quarterback. He can be
Chuck Norris.
Don't listen to them. Listen to me. Wrap your leg around the rope.
He says they're sidekicks.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 1992 classic Chuck Norris film, Sidekicks. The film is directed by his brother Aaron Norris, and it stars, of course, the man himself, Chuck, as well as Beau Bridges, Jonathan Brandis, Mako, Julia Nickson, and Joe Piscopo. Now, in my quest to revisit as much of Chuck Norris's back catalogue as possible and review them on the channel, I decided to choose Sidekicks next. And if you've never seen this film, what is it about? Well, the film focuses on Jonathan Brandis' character, Barry Gabrowski, who is a teenager, is in high school, he has asthma, he's bullied, and because he's not very physical, he doesn't have many friends, he kind of spends most of his days daydreaming. And in these daydreams, he takes himself off on adventures with Chuck Norris, who is his personal hero. Now, when he goes off into these kind of dream worlds, that's when you see Chuck Norris in this film, for the most part. He appears in Barry's imagination with him, revisiting many of Chuck Norris's most famous films, including Missing in Action and many others like that, and The Hitman, things like that. But he really wants to learn martial arts, Barry. He goes to the local martial arts school, but it's run by a bit of an egotistical arse, Kelly Stone, and he knows he's not going to learn there, so he doesn't go there. But his favourite teacher, Noreen Chan, played by Julie Nickson, her uncle, Mr. Lee, is coming over, and she decides to introduce the two. And Mr. Lee, played by the legendary Mako, teaches Barry martial arts and teaches him to control his asthma that leads to a high-ranking tournament at the end of the film, or a local tournament, should I say. But they find that they are one member short, but there is a special guest appearing at this martial arts tournament, the man himself, Chuck Norris. So they put together a bold plan to try and get Chuck Norris to join their team in order for them to compete. Right. What are my thoughts on Sidekicks? Well, this was probably when I was younger, in the 90s. Like I say, while I did watch quite a few Chuck Norris films in the 80s and the 90s, my mainstay films at that time were like Arnie, Stallone, Van Damme, Seagal, things like that. So I wasn't like a huge Chuck Norris fan or anything, but I remember in the 90s that I had a real affection for this film, Sidekicks, and it was probably my favourite Chuck Norris film while I was in that era, in the 90s, because it's just such an accessible film. It's clearly made to follow the blueprint of The Karate Kid. In many ways, it's a remake of The Karate Kid in many, many ways. It follows the beats of that film really quite closely, to be fair. And it's interesting as well because Mako, who plays Mr. Lee in this, who plays Barry's mentor, a martial arts instructor, he was being considered for Mr. Miyagi in the original Karate Kid. And also, interestingly, Chuck Norris was approached to play Kreese in the original Karate Kid, but he turned it down. But in this film, he kind of, at the end of the film, he confronts Kelly Stone, who plays like this film's version of Kreese, if you like. So it's kind of interesting how, how the world works and how Hollywood works, if you like, and you kind of go full circle sometimes. So, I mean, if you like those type of martial arts films or sports films, that kind of follow the Karate Kid blueprint, then, and you've never seen this, you will probably really quite enjoy this, because this is a much lighter Chuck Norris film. Essentially, you don't see him in many comedies. I mean, he has tried it a couple of times, but he's, you wouldn't automatically think of Chuck Norris and comedy, and rightly so, really. You know what I mean? But he doesn't have to be the comedian in this, if you know what I mean. He's playing himself. In the dream sequences, he is playing those characters from those movies. And most of the dream sequences consist of, Barry's imagination, like saving the damsel in distress, which happens to be his favourite teacher. And then someone who he wants to be his girlfriend, sort of thing. So they kind of all go the same way. They're just set in a different scenario. So, like I say, it could be in Vietnam, or like I say, it could be like a copy of The Hitman, or there's a whole different variation of his daydream, but all of them consist of the similar thing, a dust up with him and Chuck Norris taking out the bad guys using martial arts, sort of thing. But they're a lot of fun to watch. It's undeniable. But then you brought kind of gently back down to earth in the sense of the reality of the life that Barry is living. And it's not a particularly pleasant one for him. He can't take part in sports at school because of his physical condition, because of his asthma. He's constantly bullied and all this kind of stuff. And you do feel for him. He's got a difficult childhood going on. And he's kind of a little bit distant from his dad, played by Beau Bridges, who is excellent in this as well. In fact, he's pretty much excellent in everything he ever does, Beau Bridges. And yes, that is the brother of Jeff Bridges, if you didn't know. But it's one of those films where you kind of see them connecting as the film goes on and getting closer and closer. And there's a bit of a love interest between his father and his favourite teacher. So you get this nice little, almost like a family coming together. He gets really, really close with Mr. Lee, who's his mentor and martial arts instructor. And you get lots of training sequences of him running and slowly coming to terms with his asthma and all this kind of stuff. You get a couple of scares in the film where he has like asthma attacks that put him in hospital. So there's high stakes and stuff here and there, but ultimately it's a very, very relaxed and gentle film, this, and it's a very, very easy watch. Jonathan Brandis I want to talk about for a minute. Now, Jonathan Brandis, he did CSDSV. He was in the miniseries of It. He did quite a few things in the 90s. And early noughties sort of thing. But unfortunately, I always thought Jonathan Brandis was really quite talented, and early on in his career, he was one of those you looked at and think, this kid's going to go far. Yeah, the camera liked him. He had a lot of charisma. He was talented, charming, and I think it's a travesty that unfortunately he died in 2003, apparently of suicide. I just think that's really, really tragic. But he did leave us with, not enough body of work, but he did leave us with some things to remember him by and remember his talent, and this is certainly one of them. So if you've never seen Sidekicks and you're not a fan of Chuck Norris, well, you don't need to be a fan of Chuck Norris. He's almost a bit part in his own film, really. He turns up right at the end playing himself, like at this martial arts tournament, but much of it is like played for comedy, like I say, in the dream sequences with Barry as he goes off into dreamland. So it's a fun film. I could understand why Chuck Norris wanted to do this. It's a little bit more mainstream than his previous films. I'm not sure if it got a cinema release. It feels like it got a cinema release, but I'm not 100%. And I certainly do understand why he would want to do this. I mean, number one, apparently he did it as a favour to his brother, who directed the film. But also, you could see why, because, it's quite an inspirational film, and he comes across really well in the film as quite a powerful, inspirational figure to kids, sort of things. And it puts martial arts front and centre as something really quite honourable. So it probably quite meant a lot to him to be part of this film. And I think it's certainly one of the strong films in his film catalogue. If you've never checked it out, give it a go. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Stay tuned, of course, for loads more content and reviews on the channel.